Good afternoon, and welcome to another installment of Live at the Waterhole, coming to you from Africam and Wild Earth TV. My name is Liam Burrow. I'm the very fortunate naturalist that gets to chat you through a couple of waterside scenes over the next 2 hours or so, and it looks like it's already turning into quite an exciting afternoon. But anyway, before we get too carried away with some exciting waterside content, I'd love to remind you that we do try to keep these shows as interactive as possible. So please keep your questions, comments, thoughts coming to us throughout the show. Director Chulu, as well as myself, are standing by, waiting to hear from you. It certainly looks exciting here at Jamala, though. Jamala is, of course, in Madikwe Private Game Reserve, right up in the northernmost reaches of South Africa, quite close to the boundary with neighboring Botswana to the north. And as has been the case recently, this is certainly a hive of activity for the local elephants, among other things, as we can see. Other than those magnificent ellies, we've got a few plains zebra in the background, a number of impala mixed in there as well. Yes, things are certainly looking a little bit dry here at Madikwe. To some degree, the rainfall hasn't been ideal this year. It's certainly been a little bit disappointing. But thankfully, due to the presence of a couple of these artificially pumped waterholes, at least there is quite a bit of water around. And as we know, water in Africa means life. It certainly draws in life for miles around. African elephants, after all, are daily drinkers. They have to visit the waterhole at least once, if not slightly more preferably, probably twice per day. But anyway, speaking of conditions and such things, I think it is time to check in at what is in store in terms of the weather. It certainly looks like fairly hot and dry conditions across most of our sub-Saharan live at the waterhole locations, as is fairly characteristic for this time of the year. High 30s to sort of 80s and 90s, 30s Celsius, 80s and 90s Fahrenheit, and no real rain to speak of. Again, that's fairly characteristic for kind of this late in the season. We are kind of transitioning into our dry season at this stage. Hello, Joan. Hello, Mercedes. Nice to have some of our regulars on board with us. Yeah, stay tuned. It's already looking like it's turning into an exciting afternoon. As we know, hot, dry conditions are very effective at encouraging thirsty species to come down to the water's edge for a bit of a drink. Now, all of these elephants that we are looking at right at the water's edge are males, bulls. And this guy closest to the lens, a particularly big beast. Still not necessarily a fully grown male. I'd put him, based on a couple of characteristics, at somewhere between 30 and about 35 years of age. Sammy asks, do all herd animals get kicked out at some point? Hello, Sammy. Not necessarily. So certainly if we're looking at the social structure of something like female elephants, those herds tend to be very permanent social units, at least for the females anyway. As we know, male elephants born into those breeding herds will remain in those families until kind of the onset of puberty or fairly shortly after that. As soon as their testosterone starts flowing and they become a bit amorous and a bit boisterous, the adult cows step in and start putting pressure on them to kind of leave and start doing their own thing. Certainly for the safety and security of the smaller calves as well as the other females. But yeah, certainly a female elephant calf born into one of those groups will be in that herd for the rest of her life. So those social units are very much permanent. Yeah, good question. Thanks, Sammy. James Hamilton Bird says it's 28 degrees here in the UK. I'm presuming you're saying Celsius there, James. My goodness, toasty weather for the UK. Enjoy it. Yeah, certainly no shortage of sunshine here in Africa. We are extremely blessed. This big elephant bull doing a bit of a Buddha position there. Scratching one of those tricky spots to reach. Jerry says this must be the busiest waterhole in terms of ellies. Certainly, Jerry, we do seem to see a whole lot of elephant traffic down here. Being one of the bigger waterholes here in Madikwe, or certainly one of the bigger ones that we've got a camera feed coming live from. Yeah, this draws in elephants from miles around. In some parts of Africa, elephants will walk return trips of up to 60 kilometers to reach a favorable waterhole. So again, a testament to how crucial access to a source of plentiful water is to these big animals. We do, of course, have a desert-adapted population of elephants in the drier regions of a country like Namibia, also down here in southern Africa. And they are, of course, much more highly adapted to going for longer periods without water. But these very typical savanna ellies really, really are connected to the water resources. Raymond asks, which other animals have the ability to sense or smell where water is? Raymond, I would say probably the vast bulk of animals have the ability to sense water. Certainly other species that are as dependent on water as these ellies are. Things like buffalo, many of our antelope, the zebra, the wildebeest. Yeah, we as humans, with our fairly limited sense of smell, I think don't really have a good gauge on how well adapted the senses of these animals actually are. To give you an idea, the sense of smell of an elephant is reckoned to be something like 4,000 times better than the finest sniffer dogs that we as humans employ. So, yeah, they really are in a league of their own. They've also, of course, got highly sensitive hearing, and I think a combination of hearing and that sense of smell is reckoned to give these ellies the ability to sense rain falling, possibly from like rolling thunder, maybe as well the actual smell of the rain, the petrichor, at up to 100 miles through this landscape. And then, of course, those elephants which have the ability to walk vast distances can move in the direction of greener pastures and falling rain. Sandy says, so glad to see the ellies at the waterhole, and great to hear Liam is here also. Thanks very much, Sandy. That's very kind of you. Nice to have you on board. Questions and comments flowing in already. Lots of elephant antics in the waterhole. Now, that's not actual mating that's going on. It's more sort of playful dominance type behavior between two bulls. They are just roughhousing. Few things for me can compare to the sight of large groups of elephants just going about their business. There's definitely a sort of a mesmerizing, almost therapeutic quality to it. This is just such a relaxing scene. And I guess in some ways it's a scene as old as time in Africa. It's been going on for thousands upon thousands of years, and long may it last. We are, after all, extremely fortunate in Southern Africa to have a whole number of these large conservation areas in which elephants can roam and go about their daily business in peace. And certainly, I think once you've viewed elephants like this, if you are fortunate enough to go on a safari in person, once you've experienced them like this, I think you would struggle to view something like an elephant in captivity through the same lenses ever again. Yeah, nothing quite compares to this. And after all, this is where they belong. A couple of plains zebra, the most common zebra species in the area, and certainly in Africa, coming down to the water on the opposite side. We'll see if these ellies let them have their drink. Yeah, our elephants can be a little bit cheeky when it comes to sharing the water's edge with other species. And they do tend to take the lion's share. Thankfully, though, ellies don't tend to stick around for too long. So inevitably, they've got to head off and find food at some stage, giving other herbivores the chance to come down. But no, it looks like everybody's sharing quite happily today. There certainly is plenty to go around here at Jamala Waterhole. I think as well for many of these herbivores, other than the elephants, there is possibly even an element of security presented by these ellies around the water's edge. After all, these waterholes are a wonderful place for something like a pride of lions to hang around in the shade in the hopes of ambushing a thirsty zebra or wildebeest or antelope as it comes down. Elephants are not particularly large fans of lions, so if they do sense a pride of lions around, they tend to drive them off. And I think the other herbivores are aware of this, and the presence of very relaxed elephants indicates an absence of things like lions. Another little breeding herd by the looks of things, enjoying some shade here. Possibly even having a short nap on their feet. Now, the sleep requirements of something like an elephant are totally different to that of you or I. I believe we need to get something like between 7 and 10 hours of sleep a day to live a healthy life. An elephant, in contrast, probably only needs to get about an hour for one 24-hour cycle. And that's very often broken down into little power naps of just a couple of minutes at a time. Occasionally on their feet, and also on occasion they will lie down flat on their side. Vernacious asks, do elephants deliberately look for shade when it gets too hot? They certainly do, Vernacious. So wherever possible, they will stand in the shade. Our feed seems to have frozen there. Hopefully it comes back to life, but if not, perhaps we'll go somewhere else. Alrighty, apologies for that. Some slight technical difficulties for the feed at Madikwe there. But fear not, we are live once again from Okakoyo in Namibia's Etosha area with a whole bunch of desert-adapted giraffes and once again another very large group of what look like plains zebra. Now, this location also offers the potential, on occasion, of catching a glimpse of the local desert-adapted elephants. Some very, very special ellies. And sure, what an arid-looking landscape. Now, this conservation area is absolutely massive in size. We're talking 2.2 million hectares, so it rivals even the Greater Kruger National Park in terms of size. But it is a particularly dry region, a land of great thirst, if you will. So the few water points that do exist out here, and once again, this is an artificially pumped water hole, provided in order to kind of concentrate wildlife and improve sightings for visiting safari goers. Yeah, these are absolute hives of activity, particularly in the middle of the day. do seem to be getting a little bit of picture break up there. So I think we'll keep an eye on this feed. Hopefully it stabilizes. But in the meantime, let's cross once again back into South Africa and have a look at what's happening at Tembe National Park. And elephants in abundance, as is very often the case here at Tembe. Fantastic. I'm also noticing that a lot of that floating water cabbage that we've been speaking about in recent episodes has been removed from the water. So almost certainly due to the efforts of the conservation crews working in this area. That is phenomenal. Very, very nice work. It looks like they've got the vast majority of it out of this big pan in front of us. But perhaps still need to get to the stuff at the back. Yeah, we've chatted about it at length in previous episodes, but that water cabbage can be pretty nasty stuff, eventually forming a virtually solid mat over the surface, blocking out all of the light and preventing it from penetrating the water. Alrighty, unfortunately technical difficulties at Tembe as well, so sorry about that, but hopefully things are a little more stable now here at Okakoyo. Once again, the nature of these Live at the Waterhole shows is that they are very much live and often streamed from some very remote locations. So for us, obviously relying on internet connection, which can dip from time to time. I think we have dips in the quality of the signal as well. But bear with us. At least the beauty of the setup is that we have multiple feeds in various different locations to check on. So should one fail, we can always head somewhere else and find something else to chat about. But yeah, certainly a couple of springbok on the right there, a number of plains zebra, and a few of these desert adapted, possibly the Angolan giraffe subspecies. Yeah, I say desert adapted. These giraffes, while they will obviously drink if water is available, as it is here at Okakoyo, they can go for up to a week quite comfortably between trips to the waterhole. Yeah, pretty mind-boggling when you consider how big they actually are. An adult male at probably somewhere in the region of 1.5 to maybe 1.8 tons. That's a big animal. You would think it would need access to water all the time. Now the springbok are also quite an interesting and certainly quite attractive species of antelope to look at. They might visually look a little bit like some of the gazelle species that we do see in other parts of Africa, places like Oldonyo. But quite interestingly, they're actually of no real relation to the gazelles at all. If you take a look at their scientific name, Antidorcus marsupialis, which is a bit of a mouthful. Antidorcus, translated back into English, quite literally means not a gazelle. And marsupialis sounds a bit like marsupial, like a kangaroo, and it actually refers to a pouch that they have on their rump, a pouch of the softest white fur you've ever seen. And yeah, when springbok do that very famous pronking behavior that they are so well known for, they arch their back, put pressure on that pouch, and all of that white fur stands erect. Yeah, it's still a bit of a natural mystery as to why springbok pronk or jump, but our closest idea is that it's probably a very visual indication of their health and fitness, to try and dissuade predators from pursuing them. It says to any watching lion or leopard, I'm extremely healthy, I'm very, very fast, as you can see. So better you look for a slower, sicker individual, and don't waste your time on me. And always a nice opportunity to see these giraffes engaging in this sort of forward squatting position that they do have to get into when they come down a drink. Now, they are notoriously vulnerable when they're in this position, so quite often you see them drinking kind of in stages. Obviously, if something like a lion was to come running up here and jump onto the back or the head of one of these giraffes, it would be game over. So James Hamilton Bird, good afternoon. James asks, please describe the Angolan giraffe compared with the Maasai. So there are reckoned to be 9 separate species or separate subspecies of giraffes occurring in Africa, and 2 of those, for anybody who doesn't know, are the Angolan, which we reckon we're looking at, and of course the Maasai. The Maasai giraffe is the subspecies that we are lucky enough occasionally to spot up at Old Donyo, one of our other live at the waterhole feeds. Now, these Angolan giraffes, to generalize, they seem to be quite darker in color, a little bit more ashy in terms of the tones on their fur, as opposed to the Maasai, which have almost a maple leaf structure to their patterning. It also tends in the Maasais to be a little bit more brown, a little bit of a richer color. Yeah, pretty fascinating that wherever you travel in Africa, between different regions, the giraffes locally are visually quite different. I say visually different, habitually they're basically exactly the same. And certainly if you were to put 2 individuals, one from one subspecies and another from another together, they could quite easily reproduce. Looks like a bull on the left there and 2 females on the right. Yeah, the bulls do tend to to be fairly significantly taller, up to 1 meter taller than the cows. The tallest of our bulls getting to 16 odd feet tall, about 5.5 meters. And that gives them the title of the tallest mammal to walk anywhere on Earth, on land. Lady Macbeth says, we have one very dark bull nicknamed Stretch who visits regularly. That's lovely, Lady Macbeth. I'm presuming you live in one of the wildlife estates somewhere. Very, very lucky you. Aaron Trollope says, or asks rather, are there any kingfishers at Okakoyo? Aaron Trollope, my initial thought would be no. I have my doubts as to how much of a fish population this area supports. So I would think life for a specifically fish-based bird would be a bit tricky. I could be wrong, but that's my initial thought. Oh, a little bit of feed break up there. Apologies. Okay, we've left Okakoyo now. We're currently much further east at Victoria Falls Safari Lodge in my home country of Zimbabwe. Taking a look at what looks like a magnificent saddle-billed stork. Yeah, certainly not a stork species we see a whole lot of here at Live at the Waterhole. Yeah, and certainly not a common stork species in southern Africa. You can view them occasionally on trips to the wetter areas in Kruger National Park, but there are possibly only a couple of hundred of these incredible birds in all of southern Africa. They're very special. Also looks like possibly a great white egret on the left, and I think I saw a hardy-dar ibis moving around in those reeds at the back. We've been quite fortunate lately to view a very large Nile crocodile in this waterhole as well, so I have no doubts that he's around, and that's probably a testament to the fish population here. In contrast to Okakoyo, this would be a wonderful place for a whole number of kingfisher species to exist. Also an African jacana moving around in the shallows there. Some people call them a lily trotter. Yeah, they have these absolutely bizarre feet with these ridiculously stretched, elongated toes, which offer improved weight distribution, I guess, when they run on floating vegetation. Yeah, getting a nice look at his toes there as he comes around the corner. Yeah, quite fascinatingly, those jacanas are polyandrous. So in contrast to most other birds where you have a system of a male that ends up mating with multiple females, in jacanas, the shoe is on the other foot. So the female tends to be the one with multiple male mates. And the males are responsible for all of the incubation of the eggs and all of the child rearing duties, the chick rearing duties. The female simply lays her eggs, leaves the male incubating them, and never has contact with the family ever again. Quite an interesting one. Yvonne says or asks, with Zim being your home country, have you been to Victoria Falls often? Yvonne, I've actually only been up to Victoria Falls once, but it certainly is a spectacular place to go. Sort of one of those bucket list locations to visit. Mosi Oatunya, the smoke that thunders. That's certainly what the local Shona people call it. Yeah, it's an old tribal name for the falls, and I think it probably comes from the wet season when the Zambezi River is in full flood. The water going over the falls makes a thundering noise that you can hear from miles around. And certainly there is a cloud of mist rising up above the falls. Now that looks a bit like a cloud when the river is in full flood. Real Greens says, according to a bird list for Etosha, 4 types of kingfisher can be found there. Grey-headed, woodland, striped and pied. Okay, so I stand corrected. There are kingfishers at Etosha. Alrighty, back to Okakoyo once again. Apologies from all of us here at Wild Earth and African. We do seem to have some issues with our signal again today. But yeah, there is certainly quite a bit of life around. And always nice to see things like the springbok and the gemsbok or southern oryx that are now drinking on the opposite side there. These are 2 species that we certainly don't ever see in my neck of the woods, in South Africa's Lowveld, much further to the east. After all, variety is the spice of life. So nice to see a bit of animal diversity. Alrighty, I think now for something completely different, let's head over to Tau Lodge, back up in Madikwe, for some more of those large grey pachyderms. So once again, back up in Madikwe, which has lately been the home of elephants, with a couple of immense elephant bulls just relaxing and doing a bit of dusting around the water's edge. This Tau Lodge waterhole in recent shows has been an excellent place to visit, with lots of bird life, the presence of 3 or 4 very large crocodiles, among a whole host of other species that come down out of this dry landscape to quench their thirst. And these 2 are big elephant bulls. And the ellies in this population that stretches from the northernmost reaches of South Africa up into Botswana don't seem to develop the biggest, thickest or longest tusks. They do seem to be more of a short, stubby nature. But these bulls physically seem to be some of the biggest that do occur, and they are enormous. Yeah, which I would think would be a bit counterintuitive. You would think in quite an arid, dry landscape, it would pay to have a more efficient, a smaller body. But certainly big things like elephants, rhinos, giraffe do occur in the area naturally. So yeah, I guess not. Yeah, keeping an eye out for our resident crocodilians. I'm sure they're out here somewhere. Looks like a large grey heron there doing some frogging and perhaps some fishing in this floating vegetation. Yeah, without a doubt, there is a well-established fish population here at Tower Lodge. We've certainly seen lots of swirling. And there's a crocodile just moving into the center of the frame now. Not doing a whole lot of moving, so he's tricky to see there. And a spur-wing goose, that large dark goose on the bank. Yeah, a little bit tricky to see, as I say, but there across one of those elephant channels is the very scaly back of one of those Nile crocs. Very tricky to spot, but after all, that is the idea. And these guys, after all, are ambush predators. So you can be sure if they're tricky to spot for you or I, with a well-developed set of eyes that see in color, as well as an imagination, giving us the ability to piece together an entire animal's shape in our mind, in our brain, simply from a few details of some texture. In contrast, something like a zebra or an impala has relatively simple vision, certainly not as detailed as ours. It also sees in black and white, and it doesn't have that imagination. So hence those herbivores occasionally coming to within inches of a crocodile at the water's edge, and that gives the croc the ability to launch possibly even more than half its body length out of the water with a bone-crushing slamming shut of those jaws, and then if they're lucky, anchored onto some sort of thirsty herbivore, they pull it into the water, drown it, and they can eat it. Paul asks, have I ever witnessed a crocodile attacking an elephant as it drinks? I haven't personally, Paul, but I have spoken to a couple of other naturalists that have been fortunate enough to see that. Obviously an extremely unusual sighting. Under any normal circumstances, even the biggest of Africa's Nile crocodiles, at about a metric ton in weight and well over 15 foot in length, still has no chance of pulling even a small to medium-sized elephant into the water. Yeah, and even if a crocodile does target something like a vulnerable elephant calf, you can be sure that those adult females are going to go plunging into the water after it, and goring it quite badly and causing it to release that calf. So yeah, elephants certainly are not a food source, but crocodiles are very attracted to disturbances in the water and movement. So very often a flicking trunk at the water's edge, I think, will cause them to investigate. There's a few staggering photographs out there of adult elephants literally lifting crocodiles up out of the water by their trunks. Apologies there for the slightly frozen feed. Once again, hopefully if that doesn't stabilize, we can go and visit somewhere else. And back to Okakoyo. So once again, a number of plains zebra in the background there, possibly an oryx or two, and certainly a scattering of springbok. Aaron Trollope asks, why do elephants throw sand on themselves? Aaron, the benefits of that sand flicking behavior that we do see in the ellies is probably twofold. I think once an elephant has had a nice bath and that skin is very moist, an application of nice dust helps to provide a bit of a barrier between that elephant's remarkably sensitive skin and the beating African sun. So I guess a little bit like sunblock helps to protect them. But another big issue for ellies in Africa is biting flies. So chucking that sand onto areas where the flies are bothering them will keep those biting insects off. So yeah, very common behavior. We see it with the ellies very often. Certainly quite a rocky and formidable looking landscape here at Okakoyo. I speak under correction, but I think this rock is actually calcrete containing chalk, which is actually formed from calcium carbonate, which is very often found in the soil left behind after an extinct ocean has receded. So it possibly hints that this area of the world was at some stage at the bottom of the sea. Of course, Earth's landscape and the conditions are constantly shifting. We as humans only here for a single lifetime of maybe 80, 90, 100 odd years if we're extremely lucky, are literally less than a split millisecond in the greater scheme of things. Yeah, the whole environment is shifting and moving. Things are changing. And very often the success or failure of a species hinges on its ability to adapt. Ray asks an interesting question. Can you age a giraffe by the condition of its ossicones? So for anybody who doesn't know, the ossicones are those horny-like protuberances on the top of the giraffe's skull. They're not technically horns, so the proper scientific term for them is ossicones. Ossi referring to the fact that they are constructed exclusively of bone with a bit of a coating of hair. So Ray, I wouldn't say you could age a giraffe very accurately from the condition of those ossicones, but certainly there are some stages of its life where they can be indicative of some degree of age. What I mean by that is giraffes are actually born with those ossicones fully formed. Quite phenomenally, though, as that giraffe forces itself through its mother's birth canal, the ossicones on the skull of that unborn calf actually fold out of the way. And that is largely thanks to the fact that they are cartilaginous. So yeah, at that early stage, they're not even attached to the skull. So a very, very newborn giraffe, the ossicones lie almost flat, only standing erect and ossifying from about 2 weeks of age, turning into bone. So yeah, certainly if we see a giraffe with fairly floppy, almost flat-lying ossicones, that could probably tell you that that calf is less than about 2 weeks of age. But further than that, I don't think they're particularly indicative of any specific age, not to my knowledge anyway. But an interesting question. Thanks, Ray. Yeah, I always find it a bit mind-blowing that this Okakoyo area can support any life at all. And we've seen some vast herds of zebra and other fairly sensitive herbivore species. So there obviously must be enough vegetation out there to sustain all of this life. But obviously these specific animals that inhabit this area are very well adapted indeed. Joan Mello says, I like the landscape, so beautiful, and certainly it is, Joan. Unlike nothing else out here, that's for sure. And Lady Macbeth says, Namibia is stunning. I was there this time last year. Lucky you, Lady Macbeth. I have never had the pleasure of visiting Namibia, but it certainly is on the list. Yeah, one-of-a-kind landscape. And certainly from the perspective of wildlife photography, also a brilliant landscape to take photographs in. Yeah, we haven't been visiting this Okakoyo waterhole a lot in recent Live at the Waterholes shows, the shows I've done anyway. But there was a stage that we went through a number of months ago where we were seeing the same large herd of desert-adapted elephants visiting the waterhole at pretty much the same time in the afternoon every single day. So I wonder if they're still around. I would certainly think that they are. Yeah, very special animals to see. Only a couple of hundred in the area. But anyway, speaking of elephants, I think time once again to check in at hopefully a slightly more stable feed from Tembe in South Africa's KwaZulu-Natal province. So back up at Tembe, and once again, this is Tembe Elephant Park, as its name suggests. A phenomenal place for the local elephants to live. And in stark contrast to Okakoyo, where we've just been, the landscape is lush and absolutely choked with life. An absolute paradise for something like an elephant, with plentiful supplies of water and food. Now this fairly young elephant bull, you'll notice, only has one tusk. I doubt he's actually snapped off that left tusk. Seeing how there is no stump, even checking right at the base. So I would be more likely to think this guy probably damaged the root of that tusk, possibly as a very young calf, while it was still developing, and it simply never grew. So yeah, a bit of a one-tusked wonder. He's got a bit of a swollen back left leg there. I wonder if he actually hasn't got a snare wrapped around it. I don't know if we are driving this camera at the moment, but Chulu, if you can, could we maybe zoom in on the foot of this bull? Yeah, the bottom of that leg where it does kind of spread out into the foot is very swollen. He is putting weight on it. I certainly don't see a wire, but it does look like there's an old injury there. Yeah, we'll keep an eye on this guy. I wonder if he hasn't already been treated for a wound sustained in a wire snare. Snaring is one of the scourges of these wilderness areas. It is the most barbaric thing. So subsistence poachers, he's actually even got an old scar on his trunk, which could well be from a snare as well. I reckon this guy is the survivor of a snaring incident. And that snare, as you can see, even cut right through both of the channels in that trunk. Everything is well healed, so I don't think this guy is suffering, but he certainly has the scars that tell that story. Isn't that tragic? That's certainly one of the lucky ones. So yeah, as mentioned, wire snares are occasionally set by poachers that do illegally enter into these protected areas in the hopes of, I think, securing something to eat. Something like an antelope, an impala, or something along those lines. But of course the snares don't discriminate, so they very often catch other things. Apologies, we've dropped the signal once again at Tembe. Certainly lots of gremlins in our attempts to present the show today, but back once again at Okakoyo. Catherine says it's been so dry there this summer. It normally looks like this only in October, and Namibia is amazing. Been there 4 times. And yeah, thanks for sharing, Catherine. Certainly much of sub-Saharan Africa is looking very, very dry at the moment. Taking a look at some satellite images that compared a few of these areas at this time of the year to the same time last year. It literally is night and day. So a testament to how disappointing the rainfall has been, quite broadly speaking, over the majority of the area. Now we do seem to be in a bit of an El Nino cycle. So a cycle of slight extremes. Now hopefully it doesn't last too long. But yeah, if we look at some of the trends, it is looking like it's going to be a dry 2 or 3 years. Yeah, once again, Africa, a land of a bit of extremes. Compare that to what's happening in East Africa at the moment, places like Kenya and Tanzania, which are experiencing flooding. So literally the polar opposite. Yeah, and certainly sending our best wishes to everybody or anybody who might be up in Kenya or Tanzania or the surrounds. We hope you're all safe and managing all right up there. Alrighty, our tech team has been hard at work trying to restart various slightly glitchy feeds. So touch wood, things have stabilized a little bit. I think let's check back in once again with our elephants back at Tembe. So once again, back at Tembe now on South Africa's eastern coastline, with a whole bunch of elephants. Before we had a little bit of a tech glitch. We were looking at an elephant bull that almost certainly survived an encounter with a poacher's wire snare. Thankfully, those wounds were only scars, so he got off relatively lightly. A lot of African animals are not as lucky. As we've seen in the Sabi Sand recently with the snaring of a number of leopards that have crossed out into neighboring reserves where perhaps security is not as tight. Yeah, it is a horrible, horrible problem, and those snares are very difficult even for the anti-poaching people working on the ground to spot. So they're tricky to remove, but certainly whenever they are found, they are taken out of the landscape and destroyed. Yeah, it is certainly one of the laziest and cruelest ways to try and hunt meat. And again, snares don't discriminate. So while the intention may have been to catch something small like an impala, a large buffalo or an elephant steps into that wire. It pulls tight, often cutting down to the bone. That animal may break the wire eventually through its efforts to escape and get away, but quite a few don't. And keeping in mind, if that poacher is not back to check on his snares every single day, there's a very good chance that animal will die in vain. Meat rots so quickly in the African heat. Joan Mello asks, Liam, what's the biggest river in Africa? Joan, to my knowledge, the biggest river in Africa is the Nile. I was actually fortunate a couple of years back to visit what is reckoned to be the source of the River Nile in the highlands of Rwanda in equatorial Africa with fellow wild earth naturalist Kelly Oldacre. Yeah, we didn't go up there specifically for that. We headed up to Rwanda in search of the mountain gorillas with great success. An incredible trip. Yeah, once again, I love the elephant bull doing some dusting here. Now that his body is nice and damp after a bit of a splash in the mud, he chucks on a bit of sand, which I think improves that barrier between the sun and his skin. And it also helps to keep those biting flies away. Another fairly big bull, certainly not a fully grown guy. I put this guy at perhaps mid to late 20s or early 30s. An elephant is usually not fully grown until it reaches about 35 to 40 years of age, at which time it could stand 12 foot or 4 meters tall at the shoulder and weigh in excess of 12,000 pounds. Our biggest bulls in Africa regularly get up in excess of 7 or 8 tons, 16,000, 17,000 pounds, somewhere there. Yeah, in the same vein of that that snaring conversation we've just had, there's a wonderful conservation organization operating out of the town of Hoedspruit called Down to the Wire, which if you haven't had a look at, you absolutely must. Um, their little setup operates on teams removing those wire snares from the environment, from areas where they threaten the lives of wildlife. Then they turn these snares into like wire jewelry, bracelets and earrings and that sort of thing. Sell them, and the profits are used to fund conservation initiatives, and very often to pay for vets to come into areas specifically to treat animals trapped in snares. So it's a wonderful sort of full circle initiative. So definitely, if you haven't checked them out, have a look at their social media at Down to the Wire. Yeah, we chatted about it briefly in an earlier segment, but I'm very pleased to see that the conservation teams here at Tembe have stepped in and cleared a lot of that floating alien invasive water cabbage from the water here, at least from the bigger waterhole. It does look like they still have to get to that one kind of back and behind, but they've done a very effective job at getting that plant out of there. It's pretty nasty stuff. It grows into a carpet that eventually blocks all of the light, and certainly affecting the lives of all of the species that live in the water. It's terrible stuff. Yeah, well, that floating alien vegetation is not necessarily poisonous. It's also not necessarily that palatable to the wildlife. The bodies of those plants are very fibrous and quite hollow, in order to give them that floating characteristic. And I think for that reason, the animals just choose not to eat it. So with no natural predators to keep it in check, it very rapidly gets out of control. So the teams must have come in here and scooped it all out. I'm sure not an easy task at all. So yeah, certainly hats off to the team looking after Tembe. Beautiful big elephant bull that might be coming this way. A very impressive set of tusks. No, I spoke too soon, maybe going the other way. Yeah, the genetics of this population of ellies here at Tembe are pretty phenomenal. Certainly some of Africa's largest tuskers have come out of this area. Now there he goes. Yeah, this guy is by no means the biggest tusked elephant we've ever seen, but a very impressive set of ivory. No doubt about it, this guy holds pole position in the hierarchy, at least amongst these younger bulls. The smaller guys happily making way to allow this big boy to have a bit of a splash. how the vast majority of elephant conflicts are resolved before they've even begun, and simply through body language and posturing. The biggest bull tends to be the boss. But should two males be quite evenly matched, and perhaps both in must cycles of very elevated testosterone levels, those bulls can collide. And sometimes with devastating consequences. Fights on occasion are serious enough to kill elephants. Talk about the clash of the titans. Yeah, and with enough force, they can literally snap those tusks off in battle, inflicting some devastating wounds on one another. And once again, that's all in pursuit of the rights to mate with females. Such a tranquil scene. Wonderful to listen to the sounds of these ellies drinking and interacting, and certainly the sounds of a few birds in the background. Total peace. And long may scenes like this exist in the world. Bundu asks, is there a reason we don't often see breeding herds at Tembe? Bundu, we've seen quite a few, but certainly I'm with you. The majority of the animals that we do seem to see around here do seem to be males, certainly from the elephants. Yeah, perhaps the concentration of males is just greater in this area for whatever reason. We see it in the Greater Kruger National Park. The movements of adult males compared to the movements of the breeding herds annually are quite different. And you, I guess, have got to put yourself in the shoes of a herd of female elephants, certainly with calves and with many females among them pregnant and developing fetuses. Their needs are quite different. So elephant bulls can feed on vegetation which is lower in vitamin and mineral contents, whereas females, for obvious reasons, producing milk and raising very vulnerable calves and trying to manage those pregnancies, have greater needs in terms of sort of quality of food. So I don't know, perhaps the vegetation in the area is of lower quality, hence a greater density of bulls. Yeah, I guess your guess is as good as mine. But it's certainly an interesting thought. Yeah, we see it annually in parts of the Kruger National Park that are predominantly covered with a vegetation type like the mapani tree. While the mapani is palatable to some degree to elephants, being much lower in its nutritive value, it does seem to be a vegetation type that really only supports the bulls. So yeah, in places like Letaba and up to Mapani Camp, at Mapani Belt, you're much more likely to view big bachelor herds than big breeding herds. And if you do see a breeding herd, they're probably just passing through. TK Swan says, love down to the wire. I've gotten several pieces from them and given several pieces to others. I promote them as often as possible to get people involved in the work they do. Thanks very much for that comment, TK Swan. Absolutely. Yeah, once again, down to the wire is that that conservation initiative that aims to repurpose wire snares that have been removed from environments where they kill wildlife. They're turned into jewelry by the people who run it, and the proceeds go directly to treating wildlife that is suffering from injuries caused by snares, and to fund efforts for snare removal. Very, very cool initiative. Looks like the big guy is moving off there a bit. I would bet that he is the leader of this little bachelor group. Big, experienced, older male. All of elephant's social structure seems to be based on the concept of passing down a system of incredible shared knowledge. Obviously, many of you will have heard the expression that an elephant never forgets, and there is truth to it. They do have one of the most phenomenal memories, certainly in the animal kingdom, and certainly they carry in those big, highly developed brains all manner of secrets as to how to survive in these areas. So younger and less experienced bulls gravitate towards one of these big guys that's kind of seen and done it all before in these many, many decades out here. And they quite literally shadow him, learning from him as he goes. It's incredible to think that that social network has been there for literally hundreds, if not thousands, of elephant generations. And that information is passed down with pleasure. Alrighty, well, it might be time to leave our spectacular Ellies here at Tembe. I think let's check in once again at Tau Lodge in Madikwe. Sure, things certainly are hustling and bustling here at Tau Lodge, with loads of herbivores coming down to the water. Looks like a breeding herd of elephants. You can see a number of calves in there. Big group of wildebeest, as well as plains zebra. Yeah, what a spectacular spot. Looks like Ellie's in the water as well, in the mud, doing some wallowing. And we're just about to hit 2 p.m. So this is the point where our daily temperatures reach their highest values. The way safaris, certainly vehicle-based safaris, are constructed, usually avoids this time of the day, simply because sitting in the back of an open safari vehicle in this beating heat is quite uncomfortable. But I think there's a bit of a thought amongst many of the naturalists and guides that lead those safaris that this period of the day is to some degree a graveyard shift, that there isn't a lot of animal activity happening. But as we can see, that is quite incorrect. Conditions might be uncomfortable to be out there for you or me, but there is loads of animal activity. Cheetahs and other animals, says OMG, this is crazy. Yeah, certainly cheetahs and other animals. Wonderful to see so much life kind of packed into one frame like that. And there are, after all, very few places in the world that you can actually go to see such high densities of large mammals, all in the same place at the same time. I think it's one of the reasons that Africa is such a popular place to visit for ecotourism, and many millions of visitors do come here each year. A tiny little elephant calf in the background there as well, probably under a year of age, maybe closer to something like 6 months. Little guy. Those coots, those water birds, look like they're choosing to get out of the way. Probably a good plan. I think things are about to get quite muddy in that back corner. Quite interesting, this adult female coming down to the water's edge right now actually looks to be tuskless. She doesn't have any ivory tusks to speak of. And now that is a recessive gene that's quite natural. She simply never developed tusks. And a small contingent of the population is that way. They just don't grow ivory. And it can be true of both males and females. But possibly with the current climate with regards to ivory poaching in Africa, not necessarily a bad thing for these animals not to have tusks at all. They certainly manage without them. They can go about their business and collect enough food without tusks. And I guess that puts them at a lower risk of being shot by people in pursuit of those ivory teeth. Ants says, ear flappers certainly seem to be working. Absolutely, ants. So once again, those cooking afternoon temperatures are driving these ellies to try and stay cool. And the most effective way they can actually thermoregulate or radiate a bit of their excess body temperature is through the flapping of those large and quite magnificent ears. A bit like the veins in a leaf. On the rear surface of an elephant's ears, they have this incredible, intricate network of blood vessels very close to the skin, through which their entire system of blood passes in as little as 20 minutes under some pretty formidable pressure. So a bit like a car radiator, as they flap those ears back, air is forced upwards and downwards through the gap, and that action has a phenomenal cooling effect. Yeah, certainly an elephant party going on in the mud there off on the right. I apologize, it's a little bit obscured, but it is just kind of on the edge of the range of movement of this camera. And there seem to be quite a few other elephants out there as well. Certainly more herds coming down out of this dry landscape towards the dam here at Tau. Alrighty, well, we may leave our elephants here at Tau and head over to another southern African location. Right on our southernmost tip, let's head to Stony Point. Brilliant, and a couple of African penguins doing a bit of preening by the looks of things on the rocks here at Stony Point Nature Reserve, Betty's Bay. Quite a cool and overcast day here at Betty's Bay with the forecast, I think, even for a little bit of drizzle. It makes a nice contrast to the very hot, quite arid pictures we've been looking at a lot of our other locations. Still though, life here at Stony Point is no easy task. The ocean backing onto this coastline is notoriously violent. Very cold sea as well. But thankfully for these penguins, it's absolutely full of life. Yeah, these African penguins feed exclusively on fish, which they catch offshore. But unfortunately, continued large-scale commercial fishing efforts are pushing these guys very close to the brink of extinction. The population here, which is endemic, it occurs nowhere else, is endangered. Yeah, the issue is not driven by small-scale fishing, by people going out with fishing rods, catching fish with sort of hook and sinker. I'm talking more like commercial trawling operations. Huge fishing nets that literally remove multiple tons of fish, entire schools at a time, rapidly depleting fish stocks. Yeah, it's a bit controversial at the moment, but we actually have huge issues along South Africa and Mozambique's coastlines with Chinese fishing trawlers coming in, completely flattening the fish populations. Yeah, there's a bit of drizzle. Apologies for the drops on the lens. Yeah, we've certainly got to treat our oceans with a bit more respect, I reckon. There are a lot of animals out there that rely enormously on them for their survival, and even for the human populations of these areas. A lot of people survive on the fish that they catch, small scale. I think we've certainly got to regulate the amount of fish that's being taken out by those big commercial operators. It's out of control. I've also been asked to send a very large and sincere thank you to Mark W. for his enormous donation to Wild Earth today. So thank you very much, Mark, for your contribution there in allowing us to continue this live at the Waterhole as well as Wild Earth content. We appreciate it, and you. Alrighty, well, with conditions looking quite wet and miserable here at Stony Point, I think we may leave these African penguins in peace and head up once again to Victoria Falls Safari Lodge. So back once again at Victoria Falls Safari Lodge, our magnificent saddle-billed stork stood quite curiously on one leg, just having a bit of a rest, I reckon. And that funny shape that's just emerged over his back, I'm almost certain is that Nile crocodile we were talking about earlier. Yeah, let's see if there's any movement there. Maybe he will emerge onto land and give us a slightly better view. A huge amount of movement there, right at the water's edge. I'm trying to figure out what that is. I thought it might be a tightly packed group of tadpoles or something, but I think it's actually where the water, which is artificially being pumped into this water hole, is actually emerging. You'll find the presence of those water birds, that big grey heron and what looks like a common darter. And they sit right at the outflow because that's a very popular place for fish to congregate. Yeah, a clever strategy. And Nile crocodiles feeding on up to 70% fish, or 70% of their diet is made up of fish anyway, on average. Now, this is obviously a good place for that large reptile to be resting as well. I'm sure there are plenty of tasty fish around. Yeah, and while fish don't get a lot of the spotlight, I guess simply because of the fact that we don't really spend a whole lot of time with them but don't really see them. This part of the world, the Zambezi River, Victoria Falls, Lake Kariba, is actually home to Africa's largest fish, something called a vundu, an enormous catfish which can get up literally to almost the weight of something like a zebra, 500 or 600 kilos. Mammoth. And they are found out here, certainly something that the crocodiles like to feed on. Yeah, not much activity out of that crocodile for us today. I reckon he's fully charged. He must have done some basking in the sun a little bit earlier in the day. Right now, as he sits, he's perfectly poised to ambush something like a small antelope or another small mammal coming down to the water's edge to have a drink there. Crocodiles, after all, are highly opportunistic. Certainly that stork did see him there. A little bit of a beak clapping display, which I think was intended as a bit of a threat. But yeah, crocodiles, after all, highly opportunistic animals. As I mentioned earlier, about 70% of their diet is made up of fish, but the final 30% or so contains a little bit of everything, from birds to mammals to other reptiles even possibly smaller crocodiles. Oh, and there's another croc. So he's certainly not alone in this water. Croc and a warthog and a hooded vulture. There is lots on the go here at Victoria Falls. Great white egret is that tall bird strutting across the opposite bank. And I'm sure this hooded vulture is one of the visitors from the very nearby Victoria Falls Safari Lodge Vulture Restaurant. I wonder if we're not going to see a bit of conflict between these two crocs. The bigger guy is moving right over here, quite threateningly. Adult male crocodiles can be very territorial, wanting to defend their stretch of river or their stretch of waterhole from any other competitors. And that warthog quite wisely, I think, moving out of the way. Yeah, let's see what happens there. Joan Mello says, good to see the croc. Certainly is, Joan. And nice to have them quite active as well. Crocodiles are responsible for quite a bit of human-wildlife conflict in Africa. Reckoned to kill a couple of thousand humans in Africa each year. In truth, they are one of the few animals on Earth that actively hunt human beings. A characteristic I believe they share only with things like the polar bear. Yeah, quite frightening. I certainly have a lot of respect for them. Sadly, my childhood au pair, so the lady that assisted my my mum with the task of looking after my sister and I when we were very, very young, growing up in Zimbabwe, actually lost her life a number of years after she stopped working for us up here at Victoria Falls to a crocodile. Yeah, I think with a lot of people unfortunately not having access to running water in their homes in very remote parts of Africa, they find themselves at the water's edge doing a bit of laundry, perhaps washing pots, bathing, and inevitably they come into contact with large crocodiles and hippopotamuses as well on occasion. Yeah, keeping in mind something as large as a 15 or 16 foot crocodile can disappear in a little over a foot of dirty water, where it's able to wait completely motionless, not even needing to take breath for up to 90 minutes, just waiting for something to come within striking distance. Jive Bunny says Chobe River teems with crocodiles. Absolutely, it certainly does. Another stronghold for the Nile crocodile. The Chobe River and that Okavango Delta area. Julian Thomas says a nice selection of birds. Again, certainly Julian. Yeah, this Vic Falls Safari Lodge waterhole is a wonderful place to do a bit of bird watching. And quite uniquely, again, with the presence of that vulture restaurant nearby, we get good sightings of various vulture species quite regularly too. In addition to, of course, the crocs, occasional buffalo, elephants, warthogs, and a whole host of antelope. Yeah, certainly that smaller crocodile has disappeared there, taking shelter from this big guy, I reckon. Now, fights between these crocs over territory and other resources can be brutal affairs. Two crocodiles that are battling each other will very often attack each other from the side, swinging their heads into one another like battering rams, and even gripping onto each other's legs and tails, and then doing that thing that is often quite fancifully referred to as a death roll, obviously with the potential of tearing that appendage right off. Thankfully though, crocodiles as an entire family have phenomenal immune systems, so even with the most horrendous injuries and living in quite dirty conditions in kind of mucky water, they don't seem to get infections. Teams of scientists in the United States are actually studying alligator immune systems and alligator white blood cells to see if there are any potential human applications for those phenomenal kind of antiviral, antibacterial properties. I think a lot of the secrets to our human problems we haven't been able to solve ourselves, many of those answers might arguably be found in nature. Obviously something like the crocodile is a pretty winning design. They have, after all, been here for something like 200 or 300 million years. But yeah, certainly another very tranquil scene. Joan Mello asks, how big does a croc get in the Nile River? So, Joan, I'm not quite sure specifically for the Nile River. I don't know that the crocs in the Nile necessarily get kind of the greatest size of this Nile crocodile population. Again, the Nile crocodile doesn't necessarily only occur in the Nile River. And the name Nile crocodile comes from the fact that some of the first individuals described by Western science were probably observed in the Nile River, somewhere around Egypt. But yeah, it is the same species that occupies many of our Live at the Waterhole feeds here. And certainly some of the biggest can be 6 meters, possibly even a little bit more. 6 meters, 18 feet. Yeah, huge reptiles. Still though, not the largest crocodile in the world. The title for the largest, the heaviest, the longest comes from the saltwater crocodile that occurs in parts of Australia. And those individuals can get over 7 meters. Some individuals arguably even quite close to 8. Over 20 feet. Reptiles are quite amazing though, when compared to things like mammals. Mammals experience growth up to a point where they mature, and then it kind of stops there. But for something like a tortoise, a crocodile, a snake, they grow throughout their entire lives. So up until the very day that that crocodile dies, provided it is getting everything it needs from its environment, i.e. Ample temperature, ample food, that animal will still be growing. So So records for the largest individual can be broken at any time. I think that might be a marabou stork emerging on the right there. Another interesting stork species. And yeah, certainly a character. Not perhaps one of the most beautiful birds in the world. Quite the opposite. Many people say they are the most hideous bird out here. I think they've got character at the very least. Loads of birds here. Alrighty, well, we may leave this very active Victoria Falls Safari Lodge once again for a bit of a trip down to Tembe in KwaZulu-Natal. So certainly an abundance of life in a very lush, green-looking Tembe. A couple of warthogs in the background, of course these towering mammoth elephant bulls, and a little herd of female impala as well. Yeah, Tembe is already noticeably starting to dry out, but rainfall in this area being significantly greater than many of our other Alive at the Waterhole regions, certainly in this most recent wet season, has meant an abundance of vegetation, which will be a saving grace even as that vegetation starts to dry out into the dry season. Many of it is still of a very palatable nature for a lot of these herbivorous species, and they will continue to feed on that grass even if it is dry, into the driest months where no rain falls. Corenzo NYC asks, how can crocodiles injure one another? Isn't their skin almost impenetrable? So Corenzo, absolutely. Crocodiles develop something called an osteoderm. So their skin quite literally turns to bone. It's virtually armor plated. So you would think almost impenetrable, and it's certainly well protected. But crocodiles have some phenomenal jaw pressure. Certainly a couple of 100 pounds per square inch in terms of crushing pressure. So should an amount of that skin or one of their appendages, their leg or tail, be gripped between the jaws of a competing crocodile, they can do huge damage to one another. Once again, all in pursuit of territory and the rights to mate with any females in that range. Battles are rare, though. I've certainly never seen crocodiles fighting myself. I've seen footage of it, but I have, however, witnessed crocodiles missing tails and missing feet on a number of occasions, feet and legs. Almost certainly a result of conflicts with other crocs over territory. Yeah, it's a tough life out there. Thanks very much for your comment, Spas, and nice to have you on board as always. And yeah, a pleasure. I'm glad I could share a couple of interesting things and perhaps new things for you. That's great. Hello, Jive Bunny. Thanks very much for the kind words as well. It's been a pleasure from my side chatting to you. And as we wrap up the show, I think we've only got about 3 minutes left for this afternoon. I will be back live at the Waterhole same time tomorrow and the day after that. So yeah, certainly tune in again. The discussions continue, and let's go in pursuit of some more interesting African scenes. Thanks, Joan Mello. Joan Mello says, thank you, Wild Earth and Liam, for answering my questions. Have a good Friday. And same to you, Joan. Yeah, I hope you can join us again sometime soon. Yeah, what a super way to wrap up a very interesting and varied afternoon. Long live Africa's wild species and wild spaces. But anyway, from our greater Africam and Wild Earth teams, from all of the unseen faces doing the essential tech work to make all of this magic happen behind the scenes, as well as our two directors for the afternoon, Chulu in the first half and Luyanda for the second, as well as myself, naturalist Liam Burrow. It's been a phenomenal pleasure. Thanks for tuning in, soaking up a bit of this natural splendor. I hope all of you out there are having a good Friday, and be sure to tune in with us again sometime soon. But from all of us, have a great afternoon and goodbye.
Well, a very good afternoon to everybody, and thank you once again for joining us on our highlight show. Yes, coming from Djuma Private Game Reserve here in the northern Sabi Sands. My name is Cedric, and behind the camera with me we've got Panda. So in the next 30 minutes I will be explaining exactly what we've been seeing over the last 24 hours. Yesterday's sunset safari and this morning's sunrise safari. This is on Safari.